For most of college and in the first few years beyond, The Daily Show was a part of my morning routine. Each day as I ate a bowl of cereal from a rotating cast that at one point reached literally 14 separate options, I would watch the monologue and the field pieces, skip the interview, and then watch the moment of zen. I rarely learned anything new because I spent way too much time reading about politics, but there's something nice about hearing stuff you already know, except it's funny now. I was neutral to the announcement that Trevor Noah would be taking over for Jon Stewart when he stepped down. I understood the factions who wanted Samantha Bee or Jessica Williams or John Oliver or whomever in that seat, and I could feel the end of the era that it all represented, but I had liked Noah's segments on the show well enough and really just wanted someone to be funny while I stared in my closet blankly trying to decide what to wear. When the transition happened, I enjoyed it. I distinctly remember feeling that the first few months of Noah's tenure were more interesting than the last few of Stewart's. He had an energy that late-stage Stewart lacked, the drive of someone looking to expand his name beyond the stand-up stage where it had been successfully for many years. And unlike his predecessor, Noah has made sure to keep stand-up a part of his life even after taking the hosting job. And I think comedy is better for it. Hello, by the way, and welcome to the Week I Review. You can call me a guy who has stopped watching basically all political variety shows, and today I'm talking about Trevor Noah's new comedy special, Loud and Clear, which he brought to the New York Comedy Festival last week with a sold-out performance at Madison Square Garden. Trevor Noah's style is a good match for the objectively strange entity that is arena comedy. This was my third time seeing a show in a venue like this and my second time at the Garden. I was there in 2006 for the taping of Dane Cook's Vicious Circle, and 10 years later I saw Louis C.K. at MSG, when that was a cool thing to have done. I talked a bit about cancel culture in my review of Tom Segura's new special earlier this week, but I only implied heavily that it's not really a thing rather than explicitly saying it. But let me be hella clear. A man who masturbated in front of women without their consent and did not even apologize for it is back with a much more bitter and far less interesting style of comedy to boot. And if you know that and still believe that canceling is a real thing that happens to white men in America, you are a genuinely stupid person, and I don't even know how you made it onto YouTube. But thanks for the watch time. The fundamentally odd thing about it is that, frankly, there's just not too much of a show with comedy. Unless you're seeing, Bo Burnham, it's just going to be a person, probably male, standing on a stage, maybe walking around, occasionally stopping for a drink. They have body language that accentuates the performance, hopefully, but the only thing to really watch is their face. And yet, fully 90% of that audience cannot see Noah's face on that stage. So instead they watch the giant projection screens, ones that themselves are pretty hard to see if you're out in the nosebleeds. And if you're watching the screen, why be there at all? You could get the same experience when it shows up on Netflix or wherever a few months down the line and honestly see it better. Live music sounds different, but comedy in an arena sounds the same as comedy in your headphones. But there's an energy to it that cannot be captured in a recording, I think precisely because there's so little going on. Every venue has a different kind of energy. A small comedy club has an electricity that seems to invite participation from its 2-drink minimum patrons. As stages get larger, things tend to get a little bit quieter because fewer people are willing to be that guy in a bigger room. Even if the total number of drunk people is higher, they are a lower percentage of the audience. Venues that typically house concerts feel more relaxed than those that house theater. The latter adds an air of prestige that is often the subject of the comedian's first joke. All of these feel identical when watched from the comfort of your couch. Arenas are something else entirely. People are quietest here because literally no one would know if a heckler shouted anything out. The space is just too large. All you hear is a man's voice booming through the sound system and the audience's collective enthusiasm for it. Rather than prestige, the scale gives it a feeling of capital I importance. When you're sitting there, you realize that more than 14,000 people have come to hear a man talk for 90 minutes and paid for that privilege. Madison Square Garden has a total capacity of around 20,000, but part of the place is obviously cut out by the back of the stage. I couldn't find actual numbers for seating capacity in this configuration, but one of the openers made a comment about there being 14,000 people there, so that's the one I'm running with. Few comedians are able to get to Madison Square Garden, let alone sell it out, and even fewer have comedy that actually fits a space of that magnitude. But Trevor Noah does, and it's because of his worldliness. Noah is from South Africa, and he speaks 6 languages and is working on a 7th. He comes to Madison Square Garden as a fundamentally different type of person than any other comedian who comes to Madison Square Garden. And though his comedy is as personal as anyone's, what's personal to him is so much wider in scope. As always, Noah talks about his world travels and international lessons to be learned. And in Loud and Clear specifically, he uses 3 different languages to tell his jokes: English, Spanish, and German. And the German is particularly important because it's used for a joke that I think is probably the most appropriate joke anyone has ever told for that kind of venue. If comedy CDs were still a thing, I have no doubt that this bit would be called Der Schwarze Hitler, or maybe Black Hitler, if they were being losers about it. It's a simple enough premise. Trevor Noah goes to Germany, and he wants to order a sandwich for himself and his friend in German. Unfortunately, the way he speaks German is kind of Hitlery, and he proves it by repeating the order. And Jesus Christ, he sounds a lot like Hitler. Like, if your first-year film professor made you watch snippets of Triumph of the Will as part of a broader discussion on cinematic propaganda, it's that. And it wouldn't have nearly the same effect in a room of a few dozen or 100 or even 1,000. Only when he is shouting to a stadium packed with 14,000 enraptured attendees that absolutely love it does this joke hit maximum impact. The meta joke goes even deeper for this particular performance if you know that Madison Square Garden was the site of an actual Nazi rally in 1939, and every one of those tens of thousands of attendees would have a heart attack if they knew that 80 years later an African man was imitating Der Fuhrer for comedy at the same time that movie theaters were showing a Jewish man lampooning him in a biting-as-hell satire about right-wing extremism and indoctrination. On the other hand, they would be stoked that the man who is writing America's immigration policy is a legit white supremacist. So on net, they'd probably be pretty okay with the state of things. Noah seems to be a little less bleak on the future than I am. It's hard to be truly optimistic in 2019, especially if you're young enough that the more dire effects of climate change will completely reshape your civilization. Honestly, nobody who's going to die before 2050 should be allowed to make environmental policy. But he seems perpetually capable of finding a silver lining. And sure, that's kind of the job of any comedian whose shtick isn't shock. But he does have a valuable view in large part because he's not American. He is a big fan of this country, but he doesn't have any particular connection to its obsession with status. When he talks about the inevitability of America no longer being the most important country in the world, something that realistically happened 3 years ago last week, he is quick to point out that it's really not so bad not being on top. His birthplace never even threatens the top 10 countries, and he loves it all the same. This perspective is what makes Trevor Noah's voice important, even vital in our current time, on television and on the stadium stage. 8.4 out of 10. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you particularly to my patrons, my mom, Hamry and Marco, Kat Saracata, Benjamin Schiff, Anthony Cole, @BlasianFMA, and Magnolia Denton. If you like this video, great. If not, I'm sorry. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe. I hope to see you next week.